Ice-T and Coco, A Love Story. Narrated by Winslow. Written, produced, and directed by Barron Darby. Prologue. If you have arrived here looking for the loud part, you have arrived in the wrong kitchen. The kitchen is in Englewood, New Jersey. The kitchen counter is the kind that has a coffee mug on one corner and a school permission slip on the other corner, and a small ceramic dish where the same 2 sets of keys have lived for 10 years. On the morning I will tell you about, the morning of January the 1st, 2026. A husband and a wife stood on opposite sides of that counter in matching bathrobes and counted out 24 years of marriage on their fingers, and then laughed because neither of them had needed the fingers. The husband is 67 years old. The wife is 46 years old. Their daughter is 10 and still asleep upstairs. The light coming through the back window is the cold New Jersey light of New Year's morning, the kind that makes the dishwasher look more silver than it is. The wife is pouring coffee into the same coffee mug she has poured coffee into since the first apartment they shared. The husband is watching her pour. He has been watching her pour coffee for 24 years, and he has not yet been bored by it, which I want you to know, because that is the part of love that almost no one writes down. This is the love story of Tracy Lauren Marrow, known to the world as Ice-T, and Nicole Natalie Austin, known to the world as Coco. They met in the autumn of 2000 and won on a music video set in Los Angeles, where he was having what he called a Grump day, and she was carrying a wardrobe bag. He was 42 and famous. She was 22 and not yet famous. A mutual producer friend pushed the introduction Ice did not want. The wife says the pickup line still makes her laugh. The husband says he had to use the pickup line because he had nothing else. I will tell you what they have built. A New Year's Eve ceremony at Caesar's Palace with no marriage license. A 5-year wait to file the paperwork. A reality television show on the E-network that ran for 3 seasons and ended without a reality television divorce. A vow renewal in a sparkly princess gown in a Hollywood ballroom. A pregnancy reveal on a talk show pilot. A daughter named Chanel who came early in November of 2015. A police procedural job on the NBC network that has paid for the kitchen counter and the dance lessons and the dog food for 26 seasons and counting. A January morning in 2026 in a kitchen in Englewood, New Jersey, with the same coffee mug and the same matching bathrobes and the same 2 sets of keys in the same small ceramic dish. What follows is the long version of how that kitchen got built. Coco will tell you the first half of every chapter. Ice will tell you the second half. The pickup line will come back. The Grump day will come back. The fact that Ice cannot dance, despite marrying a woman who has been a dancer since she was 4 years old, will come back many times. The two of them have laughed about most of it. Part 1. The Grump Day. Chapter 1. Coco on the music video set. The first thing I will tell you about the day I met my husband is that I was carrying a wardrobe bag. The wardrobe bag had 3 bikinis in it, and 1 pair of platform sandals, and a small white robe I had not been told whether I would or would not need. I was 22 years old. I had moved to Los Angeles from Albuquerque, New Mexico, 3 years before, and I had moved to Albuquerque from a place called Tarzana, California, 10 years before that. My older brother had given me the name Coco when he was a small boy trying and failing to pronounce Nicole. And the name had stuck in a way names sometimes do. When a family decides they like the wrong version better than the right one. I cannot, to this day, pronounce my own legal first name without it sounding like a lie. The music video set was in a warehouse in the part of Los Angeles where the warehouses still felt like warehouses. There were extension cords on the floor. There was a craft service table with bagels and 1 large bowl of strawberries. There was a director in a baseball cap yelling at a key grip about a light. I was new enough to the business that the yelling did not feel like yelling. It felt like the sound of a place where the work was getting done. I want you to know that I had not come to that warehouse to meet a husband. I had come to model. I had been modeling for 4 years by then. I had done swimsuit calendars and lingerie catalogs, and 1 cooking show pilot where the host had not known my name. I had a small apartment off Vermont Avenue and a roommate who worked nights, and a refrigerator that had a magnet shaped like a cactus on it. I was happy. I was working. I had not been looking for anything bigger than the next call sheet. The producer who introduced us was a man whose name I will not tell you because he is not the point of the story. He was a friend of Ice's and a friend of the director's, and he had been on enough video sets to know who was on which set on which day. He found me by the bagels. He said, "There is someone you should meet." I said, "I am here to work." He said, "He is also here to work." Then he pointed across the warehouse at a man sitting in a director's chair with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that I will describe to you as the expression of a man who has decided in advance that the day is going to be a bad day. The producer walked me over. The man in the director's chair did not stand up. He looked at me the way men in their 40s sometimes look at women in their 20s, which is to say, he looked at me with the suspicion of a man who has already decided what kind of woman I was and was waiting for me to confirm it. I will tell you plainly that I did not love the look. I will also tell you that I had seen the look before. I did not flinch. I had been raised by a Serbian grandmother and 3 brothers in Albuquerque. I had been called many things in many warehouses by many men. The look was not the worst look I had ever been given. The producer said, "This is Coco." He said, "This is Ice." Then the producer left, because the producer was old enough and smart enough to know that the only thing a producer can do at a moment like that is leave. What I noticed first was that he was smaller than I had expected. Television makes men taller. He was an ordinary size. He had a chain on. He had a knit cap on. He had hands that looked like the hands of a man who had been a soldier once, and the hands of a man who still went to the gym. He had eyes that were paying more attention than the expression on his face was admitting to. I said hello. He did not say hello back. He said something that came out of him in one piece. He said, "Would you ever consider dating a gangster rapper?" He said it the way a man says something he has been working on for the length of the morning. Then he paused and watched my face. Then he said, "Well, baby, if you take the N off nice, you get ice." I laughed. I did not mean to laugh. I had been planning for the 4 steps it took the producer to walk me across the warehouse, to be cool and professional, and to not laugh at anything. But the pickup line was so bad and so committed, and so clearly the work of a man who had not expected to like me, and was now trying anyway, that I laughed out loud. I covered my mouth with the hand that was not holding the wardrobe bag, and I laughed. And when I took my hand away, the expression on his face had moved. It had moved from suspicion to surprise, and from surprise to something a little softer, and from something a little softer to a small smile. He did not quite let me see. He said, "You laughed." I said, "I laughed." He said, "That was the worst line I have ever told a woman." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you free for dinner?" I said, "I have a call sheet through Thursday." He said, "Friday then." I said, "Friday then." I want you to know, before this chapter ends, what I did with the wardrobe bag. I put it down on a folding chair by the craft service table, and I went to wardrobe, and I put on a bikini, and I did my job. I had not come to that warehouse to meet a husband, and I was not going to leave that warehouse without finishing the work I had been hired to do. That is the part of the day I am most proud of. I laughed at a bad pickup line, and I did not lose the work. The funny thing is that I would tell that story later, on a couch on the E-network, on a podcast in Nashville, on a red carpet in New York. And the part I would always lead with was the pickup line. I would not lead with the wardrobe bag. The wardrobe bag is the part you only know if you are the one who was carrying it. Chapter 2, Ice on the Grump Day. The first thing I will tell you about the day I met my wife is that I had not wanted to be on the set. I had been on enough sets by the autumn of 2000, and one to know that I had nothing to do on this one. The video was not mine. The artist was a friend of a friend. I had agreed to come because the producer who would later introduce me to my wife had asked me 2 weeks before to come and lend the production some shoulder, which is what we used to call it when you put a known face in the background of a video to make the video look bigger than it was. I had also not slept. I had been on the road for the entire month before. The body count tour had ended in Atlanta. The SVU pilot work had been the year before, and the first season had wrapped, and I had a contract for season 2 that would start shooting in New York in the early winter. I had a daughter named Letitia, who was 25 years old by then, and a son named Little Ice, who was 9. I had been a father since I was 18. I had been a rapper since I was 23. I had been an actor since the 80s. I was 42 years old, and I was tired. I was, in plain English, on a Grump Day. A Grump Day is a day on which I have decided, before any of the day has happened, that nothing is going to please me. The chain on my neck was sitting wrong. The knit cap was sitting wrong. The director's chair I was sitting in was the kind with the wooden frame that catches the seam of your jeans. I had a coffee cup in my hand that had been refilled twice and was still not coffee in the way coffee is supposed to be coffee. I had been on the set for 45 minutes, and I had not seen a single thing worth being on the set for. Then my friend, the producer, walked over. He had a woman with him. I could see from across the warehouse that the woman was beautiful. I could also see that the woman was 22 years old and was carrying a wardrobe bag, and was, in the precise calibration I had learned to do at music video shoots over the previous decade, going to be one more model who passed through my afternoon and disappeared by sundown. I will tell you what I thought, because I am old enough now to be honest about it. I thought, here comes another one. I thought, I do not have the energy. I thought, the producer should know better than to introduce me to a woman on a day like today. I thought, I am going to be polite for 30 seconds, and then I am going to go back to watching the lighting set up and pretending to be useful. She walked up. The producer said her name. The producer said my name. The producer walked away, which the producer producer had done before and would do again, because the producer was a man who knew what he was doing. She said hello. I will tell you something I have never told anyone before. I had a line ready. I had been working on the line for the length of the morning, while I sat in the director's chair, feeling sorry for myself. In case a woman I wanted to talk to walked across the warehouse. The line was bad. I knew the line was bad. I had told the line to my own face in the bathroom mirror at the hotel, and even the mirror had not loved the line. But the line was the line I had, and a man on a Grump day does not invent a new line. A man on a Grump day uses what he has. I said the line. I said, would you ever consider dating a gangster rapper? I waited. I said, well, baby, if you take the N off nice, you get ice. She laughed. I want you to understand what that laugh did. The laugh was not the polite laugh you get when a woman is afraid of you. The laugh was not the polite laugh you get when a woman wants something from you. The laugh was the laugh of a woman who had heard the line and recognized that the line was bad and decided, in the same instant, that she was going to laugh at it anyway because the man who told it had told it without ducking. The laugh was generous. The laugh was the first generous thing that had happened to me all day. I sat up in the director's chair. I had not realized until I sat up that I had been slumped. I looked at her properly for the first time. I noticed she had freckles I had not seen from across the warehouse. I noticed she had a small chip in one of her front teeth that I would later learn she had gotten falling off an all-terrain vehicle when she was 11. I noticed she was not afraid of me. I noticed she was not in a hurry to leave. I said, you laughed. She said, I laughed. I said, that was the worst line I have ever told a woman. She said, I know. I asked her to dinner. She told me she had a call sheet through Thursday. I said Friday. She said Friday. Then she went to wardrobe and put on a bikini and did her job, and I sat in the director's chair watching the lighting set up like a man who had just been handed a piece of news he was still trying to read. I will give you one more thing about the Grump Day, because the Grump Day will come back in this book. I cannot dance. I have never been able to dance. I tried once in 1983 at a club on La Brea Avenue, and a woman I was dating at the time pulled me off the floor and said, please do not do that again. I had been a rapper for almost 20 years on the autumn of the Grump Day, and I had not, in that whole career, gotten any better at dancing. I want you to know this now, in Chapter 2, because by Chapter 4, I am going to marry a former dancer, and by Chapter 10, I am going to step on her foot at a vow renewal, and by Chapter 18, I am going to be 67 years old in a kitchen in Inglewood, New Jersey. and I am still not going to be able to dance. A Grump day is a day on which a man has decided in advance that nothing is going to please him. 45 minutes into the Grump day of the autumn of 2001, a woman who could not, at that point, have known what she was about to be the rest of my life walked across a warehouse with a wardrobe bag and laughed at the worst pickup line I have ever told. The Grump day kept doing its job until exactly that moment. After that moment, the Grump day was finished. Chapter 3, Coco on the Courtship. The courtship lasted about 3 weeks, and I will tell you, before I tell you the rest, that the 3 weeks were the part of our marriage that almost did not happen. 3 weeks is a small amount of time. 3 weeks is the amount of time you spend in your 20s deciding whether to keep dating a man who has not done anything wrong yet, but has not done anything right either. 3 weeks is the amount of time it takes a woman who has been raised in a household with 3 brothers and a Serbian grandmother to decide whether the man she is dating is the kind of man who is going to make her life better or smaller. The Friday dinner happened. I want you to know what I wore. I wore a green dress and the same platform sandals I had been carrying in the wardrobe bag. I cannot, by my own admission, pick out my own clothes for a first date without consulting at least 3 other women. And on the Friday in question, I had consulted 4. He picked me up in a black car that was nicer than any car I had ever ridden in. He took me to a restaurant in the part of Lowe's Angels where the restaurants have valets, and the valets know everyone. He held the door. He pulled out the chair. He ordered for me, which I had not asked him to do, but he ordered the thing I would have ordered, which I noticed and decided not to comment on. What I noticed about him over dinner was that he was not the man on the music video set. The man on the music video set had been on a Grump day. The man at the dinner was paying attention. He asked me where I had grown up. He asked me what my mother did. He asked me what my brothers' names were. He listened to the answers. I had been on enough dates by 22 to know that the men who ask the questions are sometimes the men who are not listening, and the men who are listening are sometimes the men who do not ask the questions, and the men who do both are rare and worth a Friday. After dinner, he took me back to my apartment. He walked me to the door. He did not come up. I will tell you plainly that I had been told stories about Ice-T. I had been told the stories the world tells about a rapper with a chain and a knit cap and a song called Cop Killer in his back catalog. The stories had not prepared me for a man who would walk a 22-year-old to her door and not come up. The stories had not prepared me for a man who would call call the next morning at 10 and say only, "Did you sleep well?" and listen to the answer. The test came in the second week. I want you to know what the test was, because Ice has told this story in interviews, and I have told this story in interviews. And the test is the part of our courtship I am the most grateful for, even though at the time it almost ended us. The test was that he did not call me for 4 days. It was not a game. I will tell you, because he has told me since, that it was not a game. He had been on a flight. He had been in a writing room. He had been in a meeting with the people who write the lines for SVU. He had been at his daughter Letitia's apartment, helping her fix a sink. He had been doing the ordinary work of an ordinary week, except that the ordinary week did not include a phone call to me. And at 22 years old, without the benefit of knowing him yet, 4 days of silence felt like the answer. By the 4th day, I had decided he was done. I had decided he was a man who took 22-year-old women to dinner once, and then went back to whatever life he had been living before the dinner. I had decided I was not going to be sad about it, because I had not invested enough in him yet to be sad about it. I had cried briefly in my kitchen while the toast burned in the toaster. I had thrown the burned toast out. I had eaten a bowl of cereal instead. I had decided I was done. He called on the 5th day. He said, "I have been on the road." He said, "I want to see you tonight." He said, "I want to take you somewhere you have never been." He took me to a steakhouse on Beverly Boulevard and ordered for both of us again, and asked me what my favorite memory of Albuquerque was. I told him about the small back porch of the house we had moved into when I was 10, and the way my brother used to play football with me in the yard until the sun went down, and our mother yelled for us to come in and wash up for dinner. I told him about the bedtime story my grandmother used to read me in Serbian, which I did not understand, but which I loved because she would put me on her lap, and her voice would go soft and slow. He listened. He did not interrupt. He laughed once dryly at the part about my brother throwing a football at my head when I was 8. When I was done, he said, "You are not what I thought you were." I said, "What did you think I was?" He said, "I thought you were going to want to party." I said, "I do not want to party." He said, "I know. I know now." That is the night I decided to stay. I was 22 years old. I had been raised by a Serbian grandmother and 3 brothers and a tired mother in a small town in New Mexico. I had moved to Los Angeles 3 years before with a roommate and a refrigerator with a cactus magnet on it. I had not come looking for a 42-year-old rapper with a chain and a knit 5th night of the courtship, in a steakhouse on Beverly Boulevard, the 42-year-old rapper put down his fork and listened to me talk about a bedtime story in Serbian. And the man who had been on a Grump day 2.5 weeks before was not on a Grump day anymore. And I want you to know that the choice to stay was the easiest choice I ever made. I will tell you what I told my mother on the phone the next morning. I told her, "He is older than I thought he would be." She said, "How much older?" I said, 20 years. She said, "Coco." I said, "Mom, he is the nicest person, man or woman, I have ever met." She was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said, "Then you should keep going." I kept going. The Grump day kept ending every day for the next 24 years. Chapter 4. Ice on the flight to Las Vegas. The flight to Las Vegas was the night of December the 31st, 2001. I want you to know that I had not planned the flight. I had not, on the morning of that day, woken up thinking I was going to ask a 22-year-old woman I had been dating for 10 weeks to marry me in Las Vegas at midnight. The flight to Las Vegas was the kind of thing that happens to a man who has been a single father for 24 years and a working artist for almost 30, and has decided on the morning of December the 31st that he is finished waiting for the small, reasonable version of his life to show up. I will tell you what the day looked like. I woke up in the house I had been renting in the Hollywood Hills. I had a son named Little Ice who was 9, and who had spent the previous weekend with me and his mother, had picked him up on Sunday afternoon. I had a daughter named Letitia who was 25 and married, and was, that very day, at her own house in Long Beach with her own family. I had been on the phone with my agent twice, already about the 2nd season of SVU. I had eaten a bowl of cereal at the kitchen counter, standing up. I had spilled coffee on the kitchen counter and wiped it up with the same dish towel 3 times. I had been alone in the house for the entire morning. I called Coco at 11. I said, "Pack a bag." She said, "For what?" I said, "You will see." She said, "Ice." I said, "Coco, I promise it will be the best New Year's Eve you have ever had." She was quiet on the phone for a second. She said, "Are we flying somewhere?" I said, "We are flying somewhere." She said, "Okay." I picked her up at 1. I want you to know what she was wearing. She was wearing a green dress and the same platform sandals she had worn on the night of our first dinner, which I had asked her to wear, because I had not, in the 10 weeks of the courtship, stopped thinking about how she had looked walking into the steakhouse on Beverly Boulevard the night I had decided she was not what I had thought she was. She had a small overnight bag. She had no idea where we were going. She got in the car and put on her seatbelt and asked me one more time, and I said, Las Vegas. She laughed. She did not, this time, cover her mouth. The flight was short. The airport in Vegas was packed because it was New Year's Eve, and every man in his 40s who had a girlfriend in her 20s was, apparently, having the same idea I was having. The car at the curb was a town car I had booked from the plane. The driver took us to Caesar's Palace. We checked in. I took her up to the suite. I will tell you that the suite had a piano in it, which we did not play, and a bottle of champagne on ice, which we did not drink yet, and a view of the Strip, which we looked at for a moment, and then stopped looking at, because by then I had already made up my mind. I sat her down on the edge of the bed. I sat down next to her. I said, Coco. I said, I have been thinking about this for 2 weeks. I said, I want to marry you tonight. I said, I want to marry you at midnight in the chapel downstairs, and I want the first hour of 2002 to be the first hour of our marriage. I will give you what she did. She did not laugh this time. She did not cover her mouth. She looked at me for a long second. Then she said, Ice, are you serious? I said, I am serious. She said, tonight. I said, tonight. She said, okay. I will tell you that we did not, in that suite, talk about a marriage license. We did not talk about whether the ceremony at midnight in the chapel downstairs would be a legal marriage. I want you to know this because the marriage license would become, 5 years later, the running joke of our family. I did not, on the night of December the 31st, 2001, know that I had forgotten the license. I thought the chapel would handle it. The chapel did not handle it. The chapel did the ceremony and gave us a piece of paper that was not, it turned out, a marriage license. We stood in the chapel at 11:55. She wore the green dress. I wore a black suit I had bought at the Caesar's Palace gift shop 45 minutes before, because I had not, on the flight in, thought to bring a suit. The chapel had a man in a white robe who I am almost sure was not an ordained minister, although he assured me he was. The chapel had a small bouquet of white flowers that the chapel kept on a shelf for emergencies. The chapel had a bell that the chapel rang at exactly midnight, which the chapel had been ringing every 2 minutes for the entire previous hour, for every other couple in line ahead of us. The bell rang. The man in the white robe said the words. I said the words. She said the words. We kissed. She laughed against my mouth, which is something my wife has done every time I have kissed her at any meaningful moment for the last 24 years. which is the thing about kissing my wife I would miss most if she ever stopped. We went back to the suite. We drank the champagne. We did not sleep. We watched the first sunrise of 2002 come up over the strip from the window of the suite. And I want you to know that the sunrise was the same sunrise that had come up over the strip every other January the 1st for the last 50 years. But the sunrise that morning was the first sunrise of my marriage. And I have never, in the 24 years since, watched a sunrise without remembering it. I will give you one more thing. On the morning of January the 1st, 2002, in the suite at Caesar's Palace, my new wife was sitting on the edge of the bed in the green dress, with her platform sandals off and her feet on the carpet. And I, in the new black suit from the gift shop, asked her to dance with me. I asked her to dance because I had just married her, and I thought a man should dance with his wife on the morning he has married her. I asked her to dance even though I cannot dance. She said yes. She put her hands on my shoulders. She put one of her bare feet on top of one of my black shoes. I stepped immediately on the foot. She laughed. She said, "Ice." I said, "I know." She said, "I am going to teach you to dance." I said, "You are not." She said, "I am." She did not teach me. 24 years later, she still has not taught me. I am, by my own admission, in plain English, terrible at it. I cannot dance. The wife I married at midnight on the first day of 2000, and who cannot, 24 years later, dance with her husband without putting her foot on top of his shoe to keep him from stepping on hers. The funny thing is that we keep trying. We tried at the vow renewal in 2011. We tried at our daughter's 5th birthday party. We tried last week in the kitchen of the house in Inglewood, while a record played and a dog walked between our feet. I stepped on her foot every time. Part 2, Caesar's Palace. Chapter 5, Coco, on what the chapel did not do. I want to tell you about the marriage license, because the marriage license is the part of our wedding that almost no one knows about, and the part Ice and I have laughed about more than any other part of our marriage. The chapel at Caesar's Palace at 5 minutes to midnight on December the 31st, 2001, did not give us a marriage license. The chapel gave us a piece of paper that looked like a marriage license. The piece of paper had our names on it. The piece of paper had the date on it. The piece of paper had a small embossed seal in the corner that, on close inspection, was the seal of the Caesar's Palace Hotel and Casino, and not the seal of any county in the state of Nevada. The man in the white robe who married us was, we learned later, a hotel employee who had taken a weekend course in ceremonial officiating. The hotel employee was very nice. The hotel employee gave us a small wedding gift of 2 chocolate-covered strawberries on a tray and a coupon for the breakfast buffet. We did not, that night, know any of this. We thought we were married. I thought I was married. Ice thought he was married. We flew back to Lowe's Angels the next afternoon, and we told everyone we knew that we had gotten married, and everyone we knew bought us drinks and sent us flowers and signed cards that said congratulations to the happy couple. The truth came out about 3 months later. Ice's accountant called him. The accountant said, "I am going to need a copy of the marriage license for the tax filing." Ice said, "We have a marriage license." The accountant said, "Can you send me a copy?" Ice said, "Sure." Ice looked in the drawer where the piece of paper from the chapel had been sitting for 3 months. Ice took the piece of paper out of the drawer. Ice read the piece of paper. Ice called the accountant back. Ice said, "We may not have a marriage license." The accountant laughed for about a minute on the phone. I will tell you plainly that the accountant's laugh has become a small piece of our family folklore. The accountant said, "Ice, you are not legally married." The accountant said, "You are ceremonially married." The accountant said, "You will need to file a license at a county courthouse if you want to be married for the tax filing." The accountant said, "Or you can keep doing what you are doing and be ceremonially married for as long as you want." Ice came into the kitchen of the house we were renting in the Hollywood Hills, and he sat me down at the kitchen counter, and he told me. He told me what the accountant had said. He told me that we had been married for 91 days, according to the small ceremony at Caesar's palace, and according to the wedding cards on the refrigerator, and according to my mother on the phone. And we had been not married at all according to the state of Nevada and the state of California and the Internal Revenue Service. I will tell you what I did. I laughed. I laughed for about 30 seconds, standing at the kitchen counter in the bathrobe I was wearing, with a coffee mug in my hand that had a chip in the rim. I laughed because the man who had walked me to my door and not come up, the man who had called me on the morning of the second date to ask if I had slept well, the man who had picked me up at 1 in the afternoon on New Year's Eve and flown me to Las Vegas and married me at midnight in a green dress and a pair of platform sandals, had not, on the night of the wedding, thought to check whether the chapel at Caesar's palace was authorized to perform a legal marriage. I laughed because it was so completely the man I had married. I laughed because we had been together for 10 weeks and married for 3 months and not married at all. And I was about to say, in the kitchen of a rented house in the Hollywood Hills, the sentence I would say to him many times over the next 24 years. I said, "Ice, you are an idiot." I said, "I love you." I said, "We will get the license when we get the license." We did not get the license when we got the license. We got the license 5 years later. I will tell you about the 5 years in the next chapter. For now, what I want you to know is that for 5 years, Ice-T and Coco Austin were the most photographed unmarried couple in Hollywood, and the world thought we were married, and we thought we were married, and the state of California did not. Chapter 6. Ice on the Missing License. The 5 years between the ceremony at Caesar's Palace and the day we finally filed the license at a county courthouse in Lowe's, Angels, are the part of our marriage I am most embarrassed about. I will tell you why. I am embarrassed because I am a man who has been on time for a tour bus in Atlanta at 4 in the morning, and on time for a call sheet in New York at 5 in the morning, and on time for a meeting with my own children's grandmother at noon on a Tuesday. And I could not, for 5 years, get to a county courthouse with my wife and a witness and a check for $90. I want to be honest about the reason. The reason is not, as the gossip columns later suggested, that we were having doubts. The reason is not that we were waiting to see if the marriage would work. The reason is that we forgot. We forgot for 5 years. We forgot the way you forget to change the batteries in the smoke detector. We forgot the way you forget the dry cleaning in the closet. We had told everyone we were married. We had moved in together. We had been on the cover of 3 magazines as a married couple. We had filed taxes for 5 years as a married couple, which is its own story that the accountant has asked me repeatedly never to tell. What I will tell you is the day we remembered. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the summer of 2006. We were at the kitchen counter of the new house we had bought in the Hollywood Hills, 2 streets up from the rented house where Coco had laughed at me about the chapel. Coco was making a sandwich. I was reading a script for the 7th season of SVU the dishwasher was running. The kitchen window was open. The kitchen smelled like toast. Coco said ice. I said, yeah. She said, we have to get a marriage license. I said, we have a marriage license. She said, ice. I said, I know. We do not have a marriage license. I said, you are right. She said, I am right. She had been reading a magazine. The magazine had been doing one of its annual lists of celebrity marriages. The magazine had us on the list. The magazine had us as having been married since 2002. Coco had read the entry and had thought, with the small specific clarity that only a wife reading a magazine in a kitchen can have, that she did not want to be lying to a magazine about her own marriage for 1 more year. I will tell you what we did. We finished the sandwich. We turned off the dishwasher. We changed our clothes. I put on a black suit that fit. She put on a white dress. We drove to the county clerk's office. We stood in line for an hour and a half behind a series of couples in their 20s and 30s, and one very brave couple in their 70s. And when our turn came up, we paid the $90, and we filed the license, and we walked out of the courthouse with a legal marriage certificate that had a real seal on it. And we drove home, and we had the sandwich for dinner. I have told this story in interviews. I told it on a couch on the E-Network in 2012. I told it to Hollywood Life in 2023. I will tell it again in this chapter, because the part I always lead with is the chapel, and the part I never lead with is the 5-year wait. And the 5-year wait is the part of our marriage I am, by my own admission, in plain English, the most embarrassed about and the most fond of. The funny part is the dancing. The night of the day we filed the license, in the kitchen of the new house in the Hollywood Hills, with a sandwich on a plate on the kitchen counter, and a record playing in the next room, I asked my wife to dance with me. I asked her because we had, by then, been ceremonially married for almost 5 years and legally married for about 6 hours. And I thought, as a man asking a woman to dance for the first time on the day they had become legally married, the dance should be the small celebration. She said yes. She put her bare foot on top of my shoe. I stepped on her foot. She laughed against my shoulder. She said, "Ice." I said, "I know." Chapter 7, Coco on the years in between. I want to tell you about the years between the chapel and the license, because the years in between are the years that almost no biographical account of our marriage gets right. Those years were 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, and the first half of 2006. Ice was on SVU for all 5 of those years. He had a call time in New York for most of the autumn and winter of each of those years, and he kept a small 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown Manhattan that he would fly back to every Sunday night. I was in Lowe's Angels. I was modeling. I was doing my own work. I was building on the side of the marriage that Ice did not see. The brand that would later be Coco Austin in her own right, with her own swimwear line and her own calendar line and her own small studio in the back of a friend's warehouse on Olympic Boulevard. We were a long-distance marriage for 5 years. I want you to know this because most people who think they know our love story think we were always together. We were not always together. We were together on weekends. We were together for 2 weeks at Christmas. We were together for the Memorial Day weekend and the 4th of July and Thanksgiving and the New Year's Eve anniversary we celebrated every year at a different restaurant in a different city. The trick to a long-distance marriage, which I will tell you because I learned it the hard way, is the phone call at 10. Ice and I had a phone call at 10 every night for 5 years. 10 New York time, which is 7 Lowe's Angels time. We had the phone call in the kitchen of whichever house we were in, with a coffee mug in our hand or a glass of water on the kitchen counter, and we talked for half an hour. And the phone call was the thing that kept the marriage alive for the 5 long-distance years. The phone call had rules. I want to tell you the rules because the rules are, I have decided, the most useful thing I can give a young couple about how to stay married. Rule 1. No business on the phone call. Rule 2. No big decisions on the phone call. Rule 3. Tell the funny part of your day first. Rule 4. Tell the worst part of your day second. Rule 5. End the phone call by saying I love you out loud, not by getting in the last word. We followed the rules for 5 years. We followed the rules for the 5 years before the license, and the 5 years after the license, and the 5 years after that. And we are still following the rules in the year 2026, which is to say, we have been having the same phone call at 10 every night for almost 25 years. And I want you to know, before this chapter ends, that the phone call at 10 is the second most important thing I have ever done in my marriage. The first most important thing is the laugh at the music video set in the autumn of 2001. There were hard parts. I want to tell you the truth about the hard parts because the world likes to pretend that hip-hop marriages do not have hard parts. The hard part of the long-distance years was that Ice was tired. He was filming a police procedural in New York for 9 months a year. He was traveling for Body Count Tour in the summer. He was raising a son named Little Ice, and a grandson named Elijah, and a daughter named Letitia, who was raising Elijah. And he was, on the days he came home to Lowe's Angels, sometimes too tired to be a husband. I want to tell you what I did on those days. I did the dishes. I made the bed. I let him sleep. I learned in the long-distance years that being married to a tired man is not the same as being married to an absent man, and that a tired man comes back when he is rested, and that an absent man does not. Ice always came back. Ice always rested and got up and made me coffee at the kitchen counter and kissed the back of my neck and said, I love you, and we were back. Every weekend for 5 years. The chapel had not given us a license. The state of California had finally given us a license on a Tuesday afternoon in 2006. The phone call at 10 had given us a marriage. The phone call at 10 was the license that mattered. Chapter 8. Ice on the casting frame for marriage. I want to tell you the casting frame because I have used it in interviews for 20 years, and I have not, until this book, ever written it down. Getting married is like casting for a movie. You have to pick somebody who is ready for all the scenes. The thing of it is, there are going to be fun scenes. There are going to be sad scenes. There are going to be tough scenes. There are going to be fight scenes. There are going to be a lot of different scenes. And the truth, in plain English, is that a lot of people do not sign up for the whole movie. They sign up for the good part. They sign up for the red carpets and the magazine covers and the first hotel room in Las Vegas. They do not sign up for the dishwasher at midnight and the kitchen counter at 3 in the morning when one of you cannot sleep, and the bedtime story you read to your daughter for the 400th time, and the carpool line at the school down the street. Coco signed up for the whole movie. I want you to understand what that meant. It meant that when I was tired in New York in 2003, she did not punish me. It meant that when she was sad in Los Angeles in 2004, because she had been auditioning for a year and not getting the parts she wanted, I did not minimize it. It meant that we had agreed, somewhere in the first 3 weeks of dating, that the marriage we were going to build was not going to be the marriage you see in the magazines. The marriage in the magazines is a fun scene. The marriage I had signed up for was the whole movie. I will tell you the moment I knew she had signed up for the whole movie. It was in the spring of 2003. We were in the apartment in Midtown Manhattan. The SVU writer's room had asked me to come in on a Saturday to read for a scene. I had not slept. I had a head cold. I had been crying earlier in the morning because my daughter Letitia had called and told me her grandfather, my father-in-law from a relationship I had not been in since the 80s, had died. I had not been close to him. I had been close to Letitia, and Letitia had been close to him, and Letitia was sad. And I had been sitting on the edge of the bed in the Midtown apartment, crying about a man I had not loved, but a daughter I did. Coco came into the room. She had been making toast. She had a coffee mug in her hand. She did not ask me what was wrong. She sat down next to me. She put the coffee mug down on the bedside table. She put her arm around my shoulder. She did not say anything for about 3 minutes. Then she said, "You do not have to go to the writer's room today." I said, "I have to go to the writer's room today." She said, "Then I will drive you." She drove me. She had not driven in Midtown Manhattan before. She drove me to the writer's room on West 57th Street. She waited in the lobby for 2 hours. She did not call her mother. She did not call her friends. She did not look at a magazine. she sat in the lobby and waited. And when I came down, she handed me a fresh coffee from the cart on the corner. And we walked home up Broadway in the spring afternoon. And she did not bring up Laetitia, or the writer's room, or the head cold for the rest of the day. That is what signing up for the whole movie looks like. That is what casting the right woman gets you. That is the thing I have been trying to tell young men in interviews for 20 years. And that they have, almost universally, not understood the first time I have said it. The funny part of the casting frame is that I cannot dance. I bring up the dancing again because the dancing is the part of the casting frame I always forget to mention. A man can have all the right scenes and all the right read and all the right chemistry and still not be able to dance with his wife. The thing about marrying a woman who has been a dancer since she was 4 is that she will, when the music comes on, look at you with a small, specific hope. The hope is that this time you will dance. The hope is that this time you will not step on her foot. I have, for 24 years, disappointed the hope. Coco has, for 24 years, laughed about it and put her bare foot on top of my shoe and forgiven me. That is the casting frame in one sentence. The right wife will put her bare foot on top of your shoe and forgive you anyway. Chapter 9. Coco. On the night Ice Loves Coco premiered. The night Ice Loves Coco premiered on the E-Network was Sunday, June the 12th, 2011. I will tell you plainly that I had been afraid of the premiere for about a year. The show had been Ice's idea. He had been on SVU for 10 years by then, and he was, in his own private framing, looking for a way to bring the rest of his family along on the income from a network show. The E-Network had come to him with the offer. The offer was for a docu-style show that would follow our marriage. The offer paid better than I had expected. I will tell you plainly that the money was not the reason I said yes. The reason I said yes was that Ice asked me to. Ice asked me to in the kitchen of the new house in New Jersey, at the kitchen counter, on a Tuesday morning in the autumn of 2010. And I said yes, because the man asking me had not asked me for very much in 9 years of marriage. And the one thing he was asking me for was to be on a television show with him. The crew started shooting in January of 2011. The crew was small. The crew was 3 men and 1 woman, and they came into the house on Monday mornings, and they left on Friday afternoons. The crew filmed us at the kitchen counter, and on the front porch, and at the supermarket, and at the dog park, and at the back porch, and on the school drop-off run for Ice's grandson Elijah, who was 16 by then and was, every weekday morning, the funniest part of the show without having signed up to be. The show was not a fight show. I want you to know this because the E! Network had, at the time, a reputation for fight shows, and the offer had originally been for a fight show. And Ice had said no to the fight show, and the network had come back with a different offer that was not a fight show. The show was an ordinary day show. The show was the kind of show where you would watch me make oatmeal for Ice at the kitchen counter. And Ice would say something about the oatmeal not being sweet enough. And I would say something about the oatmeal being fine. And that was the scene. The show was, in plain English, a small show. The show was, in plain English, the truest thing about our marriage that ever got filmed. The premiere was on June the 12th. We had a small viewing party at the house in New Jersey. We invited the crew and their families and Ice's daughter Letitia and her son Elijah, and a few of the producers from the network and my mother, who had flown in from Albuquerque. My mother had not, before that night, ever watched a full episode of a reality television show. My mother sat on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand and watched her daughter on television for 42 minutes. At the end of the episode, my mother turned to me and said, "Coco." I said, "Mom." She said, "You are still you." I said, "I am still me." She said, "Then it is okay." I want you to know that my mother's blessing was the part of the premiere I had been most afraid of, and the part of the premiere I am most grateful for, and the part of the premiere I think about every time someone asks me in an interview whether the reality television show was good for our marriage. The reality television show was good for our marriage. I will tell you why. I will tell you because almost every other couple who has done a reality television show has said the opposite. And the opposite is not, in our case, the truth. The reality television show was good for our marriage because Ice and I had agreed before the cameras came in that we would not pretend. We would not stage fights. We would not stage reconciliations. We would not stage a pregnancy we did not have. We would let the cameras film whatever they filmed. We would not, in the editing room, fight for one version of ourselves over another. We would, in plain English, be ourselves on television for 3 seasons, and then we would stop. The premiere ratings were good. The reviews were kinder than I had expected. The funny thing is that the part of the show the reviewers loved was the part Ice and I had been the least sure about. The part the reviewers loved was the kitchen counter. The reviewers loved the kitchen counter because the kitchen counter, in plain English, was the part of our marriage that the rest of the world had not, until then, been allowed to see. I will give you one more thing. On the night of the premiere, After the viewing party ended and my mother went up to bed, and the dog went to sleep on the front porch, Ice and I stood at the kitchen counter and drank one glass of champagne each. Ice put on a record. Ice asked me to dance. I put my bare foot on top of his shoe. Ice stepped on the foot. I laughed against his shoulder. I said, "Ice." He said, "I know." Part 3. Ice Loves Coco. Chapter 10. Ice on the vow renewal at W Hollywood. The vow renewal was a week before the premiere of Ice Loves Coco. It was on a Saturday, June the 4th, 2011. The vow renewal was held at the W Hollywood in a small ballroom on the second floor that had a chandelier and a long aisle, and about 120 folding chairs covered in white cloth. We had not planned the vow renewal for the show. The vow renewal had been on the calendar for almost a year. The fact that the network filmed the vow renewal as the first episode of the show was a coincidence of timing that the network was, in plain English, very grateful for. I want to tell you what Coco wore. She wore a sparkly princess gown. The gown had a long train and a small tiara, and a corset top that she had picked out after about 3 months of going to 4 dress shops with the help of her mother and a designer who had become her friend during the planning. The gown was, in plain English, a wedding dress. Coco had not, in 2001 in Las Vegas, gotten to wear a wedding dress. Coco had worn a green dress and a pair of platform sandals. Coco had been, on the morning of the chapel ceremony, 22 years old and 3 weeks into thinking about what she was going to wear. The vow renewal was, for Coco, the wedding dress she had not gotten the first time. I want to tell you what I wore. I wore a white suit. I had not, before that day, owned a white suit. I had bought the suit a month before the renewal, at a place on Rodeo Drive that Coco had picked, and I had hated the white suit until I had seen it in the mirror on the morning of June the 4th, at which point I had decided that the white suit was, in plain English, the best suit I had ever owned. I wore a red rose boutonniere. I wore black shoes that were not the shoes I had worn at the chapel in 2001. The black shoes were softer. The black shoes were better at the dancing I was, in any event, not going to be good at. The ceremony was small. We had 120 guests. We had Ice's daughter Letitia and her son Elijah, who was now 16 and was holding a small video camera he had asked me 3 weeks before if he could bring. We had Coco's mother. We had Coco's brothers. We had a few of the producers from the network and a few of the writers from SVU, and the producer who had introduced us on the music video set in the autumn of 2001. The producer had not been to a wedding of mine before. The producer cried during the vows, which I had not, in 20 years of friendship, ever seen him do. The vows were the vows we had not gotten to write the first time. I want to tell you what I said, because I have said this many times in interviews, and the interviews always cut it down. I said, Coco, I have not been an easy man to be married to for 9 years and 4 months. I said, Coco, I have been on the road, and on the call sheet, and on a Grump day, and on the phone, and in a writer's room, and in a hotel suite in Midtown Manhattan, when you needed me to be at home in Lowe's Angels. I said, Coco, you have been on a flight to Las Vegas, and on a couch on the E-Network, and on a kitchen stool in a house in New Jersey for 9 years and 4 months. And you have not, in any of that time, asked me for anything I could not give you. I said, Coco, I am going to spend the rest of the movie trying to deserve the casting. She cried. She did not, by my count, cry often. She cried at the vow renewal. She put her bare hand on my shoulder. She said her vows in a voice that wobbled. I want to tell you what she said, because what she said was the line I have repeated to myself every morning for 15 years. She said, Ice, I will love you for the next 9 years, and the next 9 years after that, and the next 9 years after that. And when we are too old to count the years, I will love you for the days. The reception was downstairs. The reception had food. The reception had a band. The reception had a dance floor. Coco asked me to dance. Coco knew before she asked me what was going to happen. Coco asked me to dance because the cameras were filming, and because her mother was watching, and because the producer of the show had said in the pre-production meeting that the first dance was the shot the show needed. Coco asked me to dance, and I said yes, and we walked out onto the floor. I stepped on her foot. I stepped on her foot in front of 120 guests and 3 cameras, and her mother and my daughter, and the producer who had introduced us in 2001. Coco laughed against my shoulder. The cameras caught it. The footage opened the first episode of Ice Loves Coco 8 days later. The footage has been on the internet ever since. I want you to know plainly that I am not, in any of the 24 years since the chapel, sorry that I stepped on her foot. The step on her foot is the most honest thing I have ever done in front of a camera. Chapter 11, Coco on the Trying for a Baby years. The 3 seasons of Ice Loves Coco ran from June of 2011 through February of 2014. 43 episodes. The seasons were the easiest part of the marriage and the hardest part of the marriage at the same time, and I want to tell you why. The easy part was the work. The crew became family. The producer became a friend. The network was, by the standards of network television, kind. The The check came on time. The schedule was predictable. We knew in January of each year what we would be doing in March and April and May. The show paid for the renovation of the house in New Jersey. The show paid for my mother to come out twice a year. The show paid for Ice's grandson Elijah's first car, which Ice and I had not asked the show to pay for, and which we did not, in the end, regret paying for. The hard part was the trying. I cannot tell you how many times I cried at the kitchen counter over a negative test before I learned to put the test in the trash and finish making the toast. I will tell you plainly, because I have told this story on a couch on the E-Network, and on a podcast in Nashville, and on a magazine cover in 2015, that Ice and I had been trying for a baby since the autumn of 2010. I had been on the pill since I was 18. I had been on the pill for 17 years by the autumn of 2010. I had come off the pill in October of that year, the same week Ice and I had agreed to do the show. I had thought in October of 2010 that I would be pregnant by Christmas. I was not pregnant by Christmas. I was not pregnant by Easter. I was not pregnant by the night of the premiere. I was not pregnant during the filming of season 1 or season 2 or season 3. I was 32 years old in the autumn of 2011, and I was 35 years old at the wrap party for season 3 in February of 2014. And I had not, in 3.5 years of trying, been pregnant for a single day. The hard part was not the trying. The hard part was the cameras. The cameras did not know we were trying. The cameras did not know we were going to a fertility specialist in Beverly Hills on the Tuesday mornings. I had told the production I was going to my dentist. The cameras did not know we were crying at the kitchen counter on Saturday nights after a negative test. The cameras did not know that the small smile I gave Ice on the kitchen counter in episode 17 of season 2 was the small smile of a woman who had, that morning, taken a pregnancy test and gotten one line on the stick. I did not, in the 3 seasons of the show, tell the cameras any of it. Ice did not tell the cameras any of it. We had agreed before season 1 that the cameras would not film the trying for a baby part of the marriage. We had agreed because we had not wanted to put a fertility journey on the E-Network. We had agreed because we had wanted, if a baby ever came, for the baby to be the news and not the journey to be the news. The baby did not come on the show. I want you to know this because most people assume the baby came on the show. The baby came the year after the show. The baby came in November of 2015, 18 months after the wrap party for season 3. And the baby came at the end of the 3rd year, I had been off the pill, and the baby came after a long and quiet and unfilmed wait that I have only, since the show ended, been able to talk about in interviews. The funny thing is that the cameras taught me how to talk about it. The cameras taught me how to say a small, specific, honest sentence in a calm voice and let the sentence land. The cameras taught me that the worst thing you can do in plain English, on television, or in a marriage is over-explain. The cameras taught me to wait. The cameras taught me, by accident, the thing I would later use to talk about a pregnancy loss and a difficult delivery and a high blood pressure scare in the maternity ward. By the time the show ended, in February of 2014, I had been off the pill for 3.5 years. I had not been pregnant for a single day of it. I had cried at the kitchen counter many times. I had laughed against Ice's shoulder many times. The dance steps had stayed the same. The phone call at 10 had stayed the same. The Grump day had not come back. We were, in plain English, still us. Chapter 12. Ice on the move to New Jersey. We had bought the house in Inglewood in 2009. We had bought the house because we had been driving home from a Yankees game with Elijah and Coco had pointed at the house from the back seat of the car and said, "I want to live there." We had not, at the time, been in the market for a house in New Jersey. We had been, on the day of the Yankees game, between 2 homes in California and 1 apartment in Manhattan. And the idea of buying a house in Inglewood had not been on the schedule for any of the 3. But Coco had pointed. Coco had pointed at the house, which had a front porch and a back porch and a long driveway and a big tree on the corner of the lot. And Coco had said, in the back seat of the car with Elijah next to her, "I want to live there." I had said, "Coco, the house is not for sale." Coco had said, "Can we knock on the door?" I had said, "Coco, we are not going to knock on the door of a stranger's house at 6 in the evening on a Sunday and ask the stranger if they want to sell us their house." Coco had said, "Why not?" I had said, "I do not have a good answer to that." Coco had said, "Then can we please?" We knocked on the door. I want you to know that I am embarrassed about this even now, 15 years later. We knocked on the door of a house belonging to a man we had not met. The man came to the door. The man was in his late 60s. The man recognized me. The man invited us in. The man's wife brought us coffee in the kitchen of the house Coco wanted to buy. The kitchen had a window that looked out on the backyard. The kitchen had a window that looked out on the front porch. The kitchen had a counter that ran the length of the wall. Coco was, by the time we had finished the coffee, sitting at the counter as if she had been sitting at the counter for 10 years. before we left the kitchen that I was going to buy the house. We bought the house 6 months later. The story of the knock on the door has, in the 20 years since, become the funny part of every dinner party we have ever hosted in the kitchen of that house. Coco still laughs about my face when the old man opened the door and recognized me. The man's wife had wanted to retire to Florida. The man had wanted to retire wherever his wife wanted to retire. The price was reasonable. The closing was fast. We moved in over the course of 3 weekends in October of 2009. I want you to know what I moved in. I moved in 3 boxes of records, a chain, 2 knit caps, a black suit, and the white suit I had bought for the vow renewal that would not happen for another 20 months. Coco moved in everything else. The house in Inglewood became the house. By the time the show ended in February of 2014, the house had been our primary home for almost 4.5 years. The house had a kitchen we had renovated. The house had a back porch we had screened in. The house had a front porch with 2 rocking chairs that Coco's mother had given us as a housewarming gift. The house had, in the upstairs hall, a small framed photograph of me in the white suit, and Coco in the sparkly princess gown at the vow renewal at W Hollywood. The house had, on the kitchen counter, the same coffee mug we had brought from the rented house in the Hollywood Hills. The house in Inglewood was where, in July of 2015, Coco walked into the kitchen with a small plastic stick in her hand and laid the stick on the kitchen counter and said, "Ice." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Look at the stick." I looked at the stick. The stick had 2 lines on it. I sat down on a kitchen stool. I put my hands on the counter. I looked at my wife. I said, "Coco." I said, "Are you?" She said, "I am." I said, "How long?" She said, "About 6 weeks." I want you to know what I did. I cried. I cried for about 1.5 minutes, standing in the kitchen of the house in Inglewood, with a coffee mug on the counter, and a dish towel on the kitchen sink, and the dishwasher running in the background, and my wife of 9 years and 7 months standing across the counter from me with a small plastic stick in her hand and a smile on her face that was the smile of a woman who had, for almost 5 years, been waiting for the small, specific moment we were now in. I cried because I had been a father since I was 18 years old. I cried because I had not, in any of the previous 42 years of fatherhood, gotten to be in a kitchen with a wife I had chosen and a positive test on the kitchen counter, and a moment that was, in plain English, entirely good. Coco hugged me. Coco did not laugh against my shoulder. Coco cried with me. We stood at the kitchen counter and cried together until the dishwasher finished its cycle, and the kitchen was, for the first time in the morning, quiet. That was the morning that mattered. The premiere had mattered. The vow renewal had mattered. The license filing had mattered. The chapel had mattered. The Grump day had mattered. None of them had mattered the way the kitchen counter in Inglewood in July of 2015 mattered. The kitchen counter is, in plain English, where everything in our marriage has always happened. Chapter 13, Coco on the talk show pilot. The pregnancy reveal happened on the set of a talk show pilot Ice, and I had agreed to film for the syndication market. The pilot was called Ice and Coco. The pilot was being shot in Stamford, Connecticut, over the course of 3 weeks in July of 2015. The pilot had a small live audience. The pilot had 2 co-hosts in 2 chairs and a coffee table and a kitchen counter behind us and a small house band led by Elijah, who was 20 by then and a good drummer. I had not, on the morning we drove to Stamford to film the pilot, planned to announce the pregnancy on the show. I had planned to wait until I was through the first trimester. I had been told by the fertility specialist in Beverly Hills 3 years before that the first trimester was the trimester to be careful about. And I had been careful in many ways during the 6 weeks I had known I was pregnant. I had not been drinking. I had been eating cereal and toast for breakfast every morning at the kitchen counter in Inglewood. I had been doing the small, specific things a pregnant woman in her 30s is told to do. But the morning of the 3rd day of the taping, the show's producer pulled me aside in the green room. The show's producer had noticed something. The show's producer had noticed that I had, on the previous afternoon's taping, eaten 3 sleeves of saltine crackers and a glass of ginger ale during the lunch break. The producer was, in plain English, a smart woman. The producer asked me, in the green room, the question I had not been ready to be asked. She said, "Coco, are you?" I said, "I am." She said, "Coco." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you going to tell?" I said, "I had not planned to." She said, "Coco, this is your show. Your show. The first show that has been your show. You are going to tell on your show." She was right. I went and found Ice. Ice was at the kitchen counter on the set, where he had been pretending to make a sandwich for the B-roll the camera operator was filming for the 2nd segment. I said, "Ice." He said, "Yeah." I said, "The producer asked me." He said, "And you said?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are we going to tell?" I said, "On the show." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." We told on the show. We told in the 3rd segment of the morning's taping. We had the audience and the cameras and the small band and Elijah on the drums. Ice said, "Folks, we have something to tell you." I said, "Ice and I are having a baby." The audience screamed. Elijah hit one cymbal that he had not been told to hit. The producer laughed and wiped her eye with the cuff of her shirt. Ice walked across the set and put his arm around my shoulder. I want you to know what I felt in that moment, because the moment has been on the internet ever since, and the moment did not, on the internet, look anything like what I felt. I felt, in plain English, that I was finally going to have what I had been waiting for. I felt that the long, quiet 5 years of trying were over. I felt that the man I had married in a chapel in Las Vegas, with no marriage license, was going to be the father of my daughter, and that the daughter was going to grow up in the kitchen of a house in Inglewood, New Jersey, with the same coffee mug and the same dish towel and the same dishwasher and the same 2 parents who had by then been having the phone call at 10 every night for almost 14 years. The audience gave us a standing ovation. The show's producer, with the cuff of her shirt still at her eye, called for a 5-minute break. Ice and I sat on the kitchen counter together for the 5 minutes. He did not say anything. I did not say anything. He held my hand. I leaned against his shoulder. The cameras were not rolling. The cameras did not need to be. When the taping resumed, we did the rest of the segment. We did the second to last segment about the bedtime story Ice's mother had read to him as a small boy in Newark, New Jersey, before she had died when he was 3. We did the last segment about the kitchen counter, which the producer had asked Ice and me to talk about, because the kitchen counter had been the thing the focus group had liked most about the pilot. I will tell you plainly that I do not remember a word of the last segment. I do not remember a word because by the time the last segment started, I was the woman who had told the world I was going to have a baby. And the rest of the morning was, in plain English, the rest of the morning. The pilot did not get picked up. The pilot did not get picked up because the syndication market in 2015 was a hard market, and because 2 co-hosts in their late 30s and late 50s from a hip-hop and a model background was not the demographic combination the syndicators were looking for, and because the pilot, when it aired as a special on the E-Network 3 months later, had a smaller audience than the network had hoped. The pilot did not get picked up, but the pregnancy did. The pregnancy was, in the end, the only part of the pilot that mattered. Part 4, Chanel. Chapter 14, Ice on the night our daughter was born. Chanel Nicole Marrow was born at 5 minutes past 9 in the evening on the 28th of November, 2015, at a hospital in Inglewood, New Jersey. 3 blocks from our house. She was born about 3 weeks early. She weighed 5 pounds and 11 ounces. She had a head full of dark hair that the nurse, looking at her in the warming cot, said she had never seen on a newborn that size. She had her mother's chip in her front tooth. When the front tooth came in 2.5 years later, and she had my temper when the temper came in 5 years later. I want you to know all of this in the first paragraph, because the rest of the chapter is going to be the night, and the night is the night. But Chanel is the result, and the result has been the best thing in my marriage for 10.5 years. The night started at 4 in the afternoon. Coco was at the kitchen counter. She had been reading a magazine. She put the magazine down. She said, "Ice." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I think it is happening." I said, "Now." She said, "Now." I said, "Okay." I want you to know that we had been ready. We had a hospital bag in the hall closet. We had a car seat in the back seat of the car. We had a list of phone numbers on a piece of paper on the refrigerator. We had talked for weeks about what we would do when the moment came. The moment had still managed to surprise us. The drive to the hospital was 3 minutes. The check-in was 12 minutes. The room was clean and small and had a window that looked out on the parking lot. The nurse was a woman from Trinidad named Janice, who had been a labor nurse for 31 years and who had, in plain English, been the right nurse to walk into the room. Janice took one look at Coco and said, "We are going to have a baby tonight, miss." Coco said, "Tonight." Janice said, "Tonight." I will tell you what I did for the next 4 hours. I sat on a small chair next to the bed. I held my wife's hand. I did not, in any of the 4 hours, take my eyes off her face. I had not been in a labor and delivery room since my daughter Letitia had been born in 1976. Letitia's mother and I had been 17 and 18 years old in a hospital in Los Angeles, and I had been, in plain English, useless. I had been useless because I had been 17 and scared, and had not known what a labor and delivery room was supposed to feel like. I had been useless because I had been kicked out of the room twice in 2 hours. I was not useless in Inglewood. I was 57 years old in Inglewood. I had spent the previous 9 months at the kitchen counter watching my wife eat saltine crackers and ginger ale, and the small specific foods a pregnant woman in her 30s wants to eat. I had spent the previous 9 months at every appointment. I had spent the previous 9 months reading every book the fertility specialist in Beverly Hills had given us, and the obstetrician in New Jersey had given us, and the small, careful pile of books Coco's mother had mailed from Albuquerque. I knew, by the time we got to the labor room, what to do. I held the hand. wiped the forehead. I said the small, specific sentences a husband is supposed to say. I let Janice run the room. I stayed out of Janice's way. Coco's blood pressure climbed at 6. The room got busier. Janice called for the obstetrician. The obstetrician came in and put a hand on Coco's wrist and said the small, specific medical sentences the obstetrician had been trained to say. I will not, in this book, dramatize the next hour. I will say that there was a moment around 7 when the obstetrician and Janice exchanged a look I did not love. And there was a moment around 7:15 when the obstetrician said the word emergency to the obstetrician's resident. And there was a moment around 7:30 when I asked Janice, very quietly, if my wife was going to be okay. And Janice said, in the calm voice of a woman who had been a labor nurse for 31 years, Mr. Merrow, your wife is going to be fine. Janice was right. Coco was fine. Coco even joked between contractions that Janice should be the one running the show on the E-network. Janice laughed and told her to save the breath. At 5 minutes past 9, with the obstetrician and Janice and a resident and a respiratory nurse and an anesthesiologist all in the room, Chanel Nicole Merrow came into the world head first, and small and crying and dark-haired. And by every monitor on the wall, in plain English, perfect, the obstetrician laid the baby on Coco's chest. Coco kissed the top of the baby's head. The baby stopped crying. The respiratory nurse, who had been worried about the baby's lungs because of how early she was, looked at the monitors and said the word fine. Janice walked over to me and put her hand on my shoulder and said, Mr. Merrow, you have a daughter. I cried. I had been a father for 42 years when I cried in the labor room in Inglewood, New Jersey, on the night of November the 28th, 2015. I cried because I had not, in any of the 42 years before, gotten to cry in a labor room with a wife I had chosen, and a baby I had waited for, and a nurse named Janice, who had decided everything was going to be all right, and was, in plain English, correct. Coco looked at me. Coco had been working for 14 hours. Coco was tired in the way only a woman who has just delivered a baby can be tired. Coco still managed, with the baby on her chest, and the obstetrician on her right, and the respiratory nurse on her left, to give me the small, specific smile she had given me at the kitchen counter in July, when she had laid the stick on the counter. Coco said, Ice. I said, Coco. She said, we did it. I said, you did it. She said, we did it. I want you to know, before this chapter ends, what I told her. I told her that I would spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the casting. I told her that the chapel and the green dress and the platform sandals and the 5-year wait for the license had been the trailer for the movie, and that the movie was, in plain English, the small, specific dark-haired baby on her chest in a labor room in Inglewood, New Jersey, 3 blocks from our house. I told her, in the labor room, what I had told her at the vow renewal 4.5 years before. I told her, in plain English, I will love you for the next 9 years, and the next 9 years after that, and the next 9 years after that. And when we are too old to count the years, I will love you for the days. Then I held my daughter for the first time. Then I cried again. Then I went down to the hospital cafeteria at about 11:30, and I bought a turkey sandwich and a coffee in a paper cup. And I sat at a small table in the cafeteria by myself, and I called Letitia, and I called little Ice, and I called Coco's mother in Albuquerque, and I called the producer who had introduced us at the music video set in the autumn of 2001, and I told all 4 of them the same sentence. I said, her name is Chanel. I said, she is here. I said, she is fine. Chapter 15. Coco on the early Chanel years. Chanel came home from the hospital 5 days later. We brought her home on a Wednesday afternoon, the 2nd of December. In the same car seat we had practiced installing 8 times over the previous month. The drive home from the hospital was 3 minutes. The drive from the curb to the front door was 20 more, because Ice could not, for love or money, get the car seat out of the latch system on the first try. I want to tell you the first month at home, because the first month at home is the part of new motherhood the magazines do not tell you about. The first month at home was small. The first month at home was the kitchen counter, and the bedroom, and the rocking chair on the front porch, and the back porch, and the kitchen counter again. We had a bassinet in the bedroom. We had a high chair we had bought a month before Chanel had arrived. We had a stroller we did not use for the first 6 weeks, because the obstetrician had said the cold air would be too much for her lungs. Ice was home. I want you to know this, because the world likes to imagine that men in their late 50s, with police procedural shooting schedules, cannot be home for the first month of a baby's life. Ice had asked the show in October for 6 weeks off. The show had said yes. The show had written him out of 3 episodes. The show had said, in plain English, that they would write him back in whenever he was ready, and that the first 6 weeks of his daughter's life were not the show's business. The show was, on that point, in plain English, correct. Ice was, in those 6 weeks, the husband I had been picking for 14 years. He did the night feedings. He did the diapers. He did the laundry. He learned to fold a small, specific newborn-size onesie. He learned to wash a pacifier in the kitchen sink in the small, specific way the obstetrician had taught us. He learned every morning to bring me a coffee in the same coffee mug while I sat in the rocking chair on the front porch with the baby on my chest under a blanket. He did not, in any of the 6 weeks, complain. He did not, in any of the 6 weeks, leave the house for more than an hour. He did not, in any of the 6 weeks, look at me the way he had looked at me at the music video set in the autumn of 2001. I want to tell you what the look had become. The look at the music video set had been a suspicious look. The look in the labor room had been a tearful look. The look on the front porch of the house in Inglewood, with the baby on my chest, in the early gray light of a December morning in 2015, was a calm look. The look was the look of a man who had, after 42 years of fatherhood and 14 years of marriage, and 15 years of wondering whether the small, specific, quiet domestic life was going to find him, finally arrived at it. Chanel grew. I want to tell you about the small, specific milestones, because the milestones were the daily proof that the small, specific, quiet domestic life had, in plain English, arrived. Chanel rolled over at 5 months. Chanel sat up at 7 months. Chanel said the word dada at 10 months. Chanel walked at 13 months. Chanel said the word mama at 14 months. Chanel had her first burned toast at 3 years old, when Ice, in the kitchen of the house in Inglewood, burned a piece of toast, and Chanel, sitting on her high chair, pointed at the toast and said, "Daddy, you burned it." Daddy laughed against the kitchen counter. I laughed against Daddy's shoulder. Chanel laughed the small, specific laugh of a child who has, in plain English, made a joke for the first time and discovered that the joke landed. Chanel started preschool at 3. We did the school drop-off together for the first week, with the 3 of us in the car, and Ice in the driver's seat, and me in the passenger seat, and Chanel in her booster seat in the back. We took the bedtime story rotation. Ice read the bedtime story on Monday and Tuesday. I read the bedtime story on Wednesday and Thursday. We both read the bedtime story on Friday, with Ice doing the dramatic voices and me doing the small, specific narrator's voice. Chanel went to sleep every night at 7:30. The dog went to sleep every night on the front porch. The SVU schedule had Ice in New York for 9 months a year. Ice flew home on Friday nights. Ice flew back on Monday mornings. The phone call at 10 became the phone call at 8 because Chanel had to be in bed by 7:30, and the phone call took precedence over everything else in the marriage except the bedtime story. The phone call had the same rules. The funny part of the day first, the worst part of the day second. End by saying I love you out loud. No business. No big decisions. I will give you one more thing. The first time Chanel met the dance. She was 2 years old. Ice was sitting on the kitchen counter, on the kitchen stool, with a record on. He had been singing along to the record. Chanel had walked over to him on her small, specific 2-year-old legs. Chanel had put her bare foot on top of Ice's shoe, the way she had seen me do 100 times on the front porch and in the kitchen and at the supermarket parking lot. Ice had looked at her foot on his shoe. Ice had looked at me. Ice had laughed. Ice had said Coco. I had said Ice. Ice had said she has learned how to dance with me. I had said, yes, she has. Ice had stepped very gently on his daughter's foot. Chanel had laughed. Chanel had said, Daddy. I had said, he cannot dance. Chanel had said, I know. Chapter 16. Ice on the Pandemic. The pandemic came in the spring of 2020. Chanel was 4. The SVU schedule got blown up in March. The production shut down for 10 weeks. I came home to Inglewood on the 15th of March, and I did not get on a plane again until the 2nd week of June. I had not been home for that long, in one stretch, since the autumn of 2001. I want to tell you what the pandemic was like in the house in Inglewood, because the pandemic was, in plain English, the small, specific gift our marriage had not asked for, and had not, until it arrived, known we needed. The first week was hard. Coco was scared. Chanel was 4 and not in school. The dog was the only one of us who was, in plain English, having a good time. I was on the phone every morning with the showrunner of SVU trying to figure out when we were going back. The showrunner did not, for 10 weeks, know. By the 2nd week, we had a routine. The routine was the routine of 3 people in a kitchen. Breakfast at 8, school at 9 on a video call with the preschool teacher. Lunch at 12 at the kitchen counter with the same 3 people in the same 3 kitchen stools. Nap at 1 for Chanel. Walks at 3 on the streets of Inglewood with the 3 of us and the dog and Chanel in her stroller, even though Chanel was 4.5 and should not have been in a stroller. Dinner at 6. Bath at 7. Bedtime story at 7:30. Phone call at 10. Was now sitting next to my wife on the back porch with a glass of water on the small table between us, because the phone call did not need to be a phone call when both of us were in the same house. I will tell you plainly what the 10 weeks gave me. The 10 weeks gave me my daughter. I had been a father to Chanel for 4 years by then, and I had loved her, and I had been at the kitchen counter for the burned toast and the bedtime stories and the school drop-off, run, and the high chair years. But I had not been the parent who knew her. Coco had been the parent who knew her. I had been the parent who showed up on Friday nights, read the bedtime story on Monday and Tuesday, and flew back to New York on Monday morning. The 10 weeks made me the parent who knew her. The 10 weeks made me the parent who knew that Chanel hated the crust on her toast and would only eat the cereal with the small, specific orange flakes, and could not, in plain English, sleep without the small blue blanket from Coco's mother in Albuquerque. The 10 weeks made me the parent who knew the small, specific way she said the word daddy when she was tired, and the small, specific way she said the word daddy when she was about to ask for something she knew the answer to was no. The 10 weeks made me a father in a way I had not been a father, in plain English, in any of the previous 46 years of fathering. The marriage got smaller and bigger at the same time during the pandemic. Smaller in the sense that we were the only 3 people in the kitchen. Bigger in the sense that the kitchen got, over the course of the 10 weeks, the way kitchens get when you finally have time to live in them. Coco repainted one wall. I rewired one outlet. We bought a new toaster. We bought a new dishwasher. We bought a small framed print of the front porch of the house we had lived in the Hollywood Hills in 2003, which Coco had been wanting to buy for 15 years, and had not, until the pandemic, found a moment quiet enough to walk into the framer's shop and buy. The dance came back. I want to tell you about the dance in the pandemic, because the dance in the pandemic was the small, specific thing that, in plain English, told me we were going to be all right. The night was a Thursday in the 7th week of the lockdown. Chanel was asleep upstairs. Coco was at the kitchen counter pouring a glass of wine. I was at the record player putting on a record I had bought in 1985. The record was a slow record. The record was a record Coco, and I had danced to in the suite at Caesar's Palace on the morning of January the 1st, 2002. After the chapel had not given us a marriage license, I asked Coco to dance. Coco walked over. Coco put her bare foot on top of my shoe. I stepped on her foot. Coco laughed against my shoulder. Coco said ice. I said, I know. Coco said, you will never be a dancer. I said, you knew that when you married me. Coco said, I did. I said, Coco. She said, yeah. I said, we are going to be fine. She said, I know. We were fine. The SVU production opened back up in the 2nd week of June. I flew back to New York on a Wednesday afternoon. I came home that Friday night. I have come home every Friday night since. The phone call at 10 has not, in the 6 years since the pandemic, stopped. Chapter 17. Coco on Jungle Sex and old-fashioned love. In January of 2024, Ice and I sat down for an interview with the E! Network at our kitchen counter in Inglewood. The interview was for the 22nd anniversary of our marriage. The interviewer had asked the network for a small, specific kitchen counter sit-down. The network had asked us. We had said yes. The interviewer asked Ice the question. The question was the question every interviewer asks a couple who has been married for 22 years. The question was, what is the secret? Ice put his coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. Ice looked at the interviewer. Ice gave the answer he had been giving in interviews since the early years on the E! Network. Except that this time Ice gave the answer in the small, specific bluntness of a man who is 65 years old and has stopped caring whether the answer is going to scandalize anyone. Ice said jungle sex. Ice said that flame has to stay lit. Ice said, when that flame goes out and you are not really attracted to each other anymore, you have to address that very quickly because it is something that is necessary. I want you to know what I did when Ice said the answer. I laughed. I laughed in the small, specific way I had been laughing at his lines for 22 years. I covered my mouth with one hand, the way I had covered my mouth on the music video set in the autumn of 2001, and I laughed. The interviewer laughed. The cameraman laughed. The dog on the front porch outside the kitchen window lifted his head. The answer went, in plain English, viral. The internet picked up the answer for about a week. The internet decided the answer was either profound or vulgar, depending on which corner of the internet was looking at it. I was, for that week, asked the answer in 3 separate phone interviews and 2 podcast appearances. I will tell you what I told all 5 of them. I told them that Ice was, in plain English, telling the truth. I told them that the flame had to stay lit. I told them, with the small, specific kindness of a 44-year-old wife talking to other 44-year-old wives, that the flame did not stay lit by itself, and that the marriage we had built had been the marriage of 2 people who had been, for 22 years, deliberate about the small, specific things. In November of 2025, the year after the jungle sex interview, I went on the Bunny XO podcast. Bunny XO was the wife of the country rapper Jelly Roll. Bunny was a friend of a friend. The podcast was called Dumb Blonde, which was Bunny's small, specific irony about her own marketing. The podcast was the kind of long-form sit-down where 2 women in their 40s talk for an hour and a half about marriage, about children, about the small, specific texture of being married to a famous man. I told Bunny the line I had been working on my own, in the kitchen of the house in Inglewood for about 6 months. I told Bunny that Ice and I had an old-fashioned type of love. I want you to know what I meant. I meant that the marriage I had built with Ice was the marriage my Serbian grandmother would have recognized. I meant that the marriage was the marriage in which the husband worked and came home, and the wife ran the house, and the children grew up at the kitchen counter. I meant that the marriage was the marriage in which the wife did not, in plain English, expect the husband to be a 50-50 cohabitant. I meant that the wife did the small specific things that the small specific wife in her grandmother's village in Serbia had done, and that the husband did the small specific things the small specific husband in his Newark, New Jersey, childhood had been raised to do. The line went viral. The line went viral in a different corner of the internet than the jungle sex answer had. The line went viral in the corner of the internet that wanted to argue about whether a woman in her mid-40s was allowed to call her own marriage old-fashioned. I want to tell you plainly what I think about that argument. The argument is, in plain English, not about me. The argument is about whichever woman is having the argument with whichever husband she is having the argument with. The argument is not about Ice and me. Ice and me have, in plain English, the marriage we have. The marriage we have is the marriage we have built. The marriage we have is the marriage I would, in any of the next 9 years, and the next 9 years after that, choose again. I want to tell you, before this chapter ends, what the old-fashioned framing has not meant. It has not meant that I am not a working woman. It has not meant that I do not have my own income. It has not meant that I do not run my own brand, or sit on my own boards, or speak with my own voice. It has meant that the inside of my marriage has its own rules, and that the rules are not the rules a magazine in 2024 would have written. It has meant that Ice is the husband and I am the wife, and that the husband and the wife have decided between them what the husband and the wife do. The chapter is going to end with the dancing. I want it to. On the night the Bunny XO podcast aired in November of 2025, Ice came into the kitchen of the house in Inglewood. He had been watching the podcast on his phone in the bedroom. He had a small, specific look on his face. He said, "Coco." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Old-fashioned." I said, "Old-fashioned." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." He said, "Coco." I said, "Ice." He said, "I love you." I said, "I love you." He said, "Will you dance with me?" I said, "Yes." We danced. I put my bare foot on top of his shoe. He stepped on my foot. I laughed against his shoulder. The flame stayed lit. Chapter 18. Ice on the 24-year anniversary morning. January the 1st, 2026. The kitchen of the house in Inglewood, 5:30 in the morning. The cold New Jersey light coming through the kitchen window, the way it always comes through the kitchen window on the first day of the year, which is to say not very much, but enough to see the coffee mug on the counter and the dish towel on the kitchen sink and the small ceramic dish with the 2 sets of keys in it. I had been awake for an hour. I had been awake because I had not, in 24 years, slept past 5 on the morning of an anniversary. I had been awake because the anniversary mattered, and because the morning of the anniversary was, in plain English, the small, specific, quiet hour I had been carrying out for myself in our marriage since the morning of January the 1st, 2002, in the suite at Caesar's Palace, with the sun coming up over the strip. I had made coffee. I had laid out 2 coffee mugs. I had toasted 2 pieces of bread. I had burned the toast. I had toasted 2 new pieces of bread. I had put butter on the new toast. I had laid out 2 small plates on the kitchen counter. I had walked the dog. I had come back in. I had checked, very quietly, on Chanel, who was 10 years old now, and was asleep upstairs in her room with the small blue blanket from Coco's mother in Albuquerque. Coco came downstairs at 6. She was wearing her bathrobe, the matching bathrobe to mine, which we had bought as a joke in the autumn of 2023 at a small specific store in Midtown Manhattan. She walked into the kitchen. She saw the coffee mugs. She saw the toast. She saw the dog asleep on the front porch. She smiled at me. She said, "Ice." I said, "Coco." She said, "24." I said, "24." She said, "Happy anniversary." I said, "Happy anniversary." We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter. We counted the years on our fingers, even though neither of us, in plain English, needed the fingers. The fingers were the small, specific ritual we had been doing on the 1st of January since the morning at Caesar's Palace. The fingers were the small, specific way Coco had decided, in the suite at Caesar's Palace at 6 in the morning, on the morning of January the 1st, 2002, to remember the years. We did not count the years out loud. We mouthed them. The mouthing of the years was the second small, specific ritual, which had started in the 2nd year. The mouthing of the years was the way we agreed, in plain English, that the years had been ours and not the world's. When we got to 24, Coco put her hands down on the counter. Coco said, "Ice." I said, "Yeah." Coco said, "Dance with me." I said, "Coco, it is 6 in the morning." Coco said, "Ice." I said, "I know." She walked around the counter. I walked walked around the counter. We met in the middle of the kitchen, where the dog used to sit when the dog was a small, specific puppy in 2017. Coco put her bare foot on top of my house slipper, which is, at 67, what I wear in the kitchen on January mornings in New Jersey, when the cold floor would otherwise be a problem. I stepped on her foot. Coco laughed against my shoulder. Coco said, "Ice." I said, "I know." I will tell you, before this chapter ends, what the marriage has become. The marriage has become a kitchen counter. The marriage has become the same coffee mug. The marriage has become the small, specific way Coco hangs the dish towel on the kitchen sink, so the dishwasher can be opened without the dish towel falling on the floor. The marriage has become a daughter named Chanel, who is 10 years old and is sleeping upstairs and will, in about 20 minutes, come down the stairs in pajamas with cats on them and ask for cereal. The marriage has become an SVU schedule that is going into its 27th season in the fall of 2026, and a wife who has just turned 47, and a husband who is 68 on his next birthday, and a phone call at 10 that has not, in 25 years, been missed. The marriage has become the small, specific kitchen morning. The kitchen morning is, in plain English, what we have been building. The marriage was, in 2001, a Grump day and a pickup line, and a woman with a wardrobe bag who laughed. The marriage is, in 2026, a Grump day that has not come back, a pickup line that gets retold at every dinner party, and a wife with a coffee mug who, on the morning of the 24th anniversary, put her bare foot on top of my house slipper and let me step on it. I cannot dance. I have not learned. I do not, in plain English, think I am going to learn. My wife knows. My daughter knows. The dog knows. The dog kept looking at the kitchen the same way it had been looking at the kitchen for 10 years. Coco kissed me on the kitchen counter at 6:30. Chanel came down the stairs at 6:50 in pajamas with cats on them. The marriage kept doing its job. Epilogue. Coco on what stays. I want to tell you, before this book ends, the small, specific things that have stayed. The coffee mug has stayed. The coffee mug is the same coffee mug we had in the rented house in the Hollywood Hills in 2003. It has a small chip in the rim. It has a faded logo on one side. It has been through 3 dishwashers and 4 kitchens and 2 grandchildren and 1 daughter and 24 years. The coffee mug has stayed. The dish towel has stayed. The dish towel rotation has stayed. The 2 sets of keys in the small ceramic dish on the kitchen counter have stayed. The phone call at 10 has stayed. The phone call at 10 has the same 5 rules it had when we made the rules in the spring of 2003. No business. No big decisions. Funny part first. Worst part second. End by saying I love you out loud. The bedtime story has stayed. The bedtime story has been 3 books, now 4. Chanel has, at 10, become too old for the bedtime story, except on the Sunday nights when she has had a hard week. And on the Sunday nights when she has had a hard week, the bedtime story is still the bedtime story. Ice does Monday and Tuesday. I do Wednesday and Thursday. The Sunday night bedtime story is the bedtime story we both do. The dramatic voices are still the dramatic voices. The dancing has stayed. The dancing has, in plain English, not gotten better. The dancing is going into its 25th year. The dancing is the small, specific, funny thing my husband and I do at the kitchen counter when a record comes on. I put my bare foot on top of his shoe. He steps on my foot. I laugh against his shoulder. Chanel, who has now learned to dance with him the way I learned to dance with him, puts her own bare foot on his other shoe. The 3 of us look like a small, specific family that has gone, in plain English, slightly off the rails. The dog watches from the front porch. The Grump day has not come back. I want you to know this in the last chapter of this book, because the Grump day was the day my husband had been having in the autumn of 2001, when a producer he had not asked to push the introduction pushed the introduction anyway. The Grump day ended the morning. The producer pushed the introduction. The Grump day has not, in any of the 24.5 years since, come back. The casting frame has stayed. The casting frame is Ice's frame. The casting frame is the frame Ice has been giving in interviews for 20 years. The casting frame is the frame I have heard him give 100 times, and the frame I have, in plain English, agreed with every time. Getting married is like casting for a movie. You have to pick somebody who is ready for all the scenes. Ice picked somebody who was ready for all the scenes. I picked somebody who was ready for all the scenes. We have been in all the scenes. We are going to be in all the scenes. The fun scenes, the sad scenes, the fight scenes, the tough scenes, the kitchen scenes, the kitchen counter scenes, which are most of them. The teammate's frame has stayed. The teammate's frame is the second frame Ice has been giving in interviews for 20 years. Coco and I are teammates. We have to be teammates, not opponents, not assets, not liabilities. He values what I bring to him. I value what he brings to me. We have been teammates for 24 years, and we are going to be teammates for the next 24 years. I want you to know one last thing. I have been on a couch on the E-Network. I have been on a magazine cover in 2015. I have been on a podcast in Nashville in 2025. I have been asked on each of those what the marriage has been about. I have given different answers in different settings. The answer I have not, until this book, given out loud, is the answer I want to give you in this last chapter. The marriage has been about the kitchen counter. The marriage has been about the small, specific, quiet morning on which a husband makes coffee and a wife comes down the stairs in a matching bathrobe, and the dog watches from the front porch. The marriage has been about the small, specific phone call at 10, on which the funny part comes first, and the worst part comes second, and the I love you out loud comes at the end. The marriage has been about a daughter named Chanel, who at 10 has learned to dance with her father by putting her bare foot on top of his shoe, the way her mother taught her without ever sitting her down and teaching her. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. The marriage stays. The kitchen counter stays. The coffee mug stays. Author's note: this book has been inspired by the publicly available story of Tracy Lauren Merrow, known as Ice-T, and Nicole Natalie Austin, known as Coco. The marriage, the wedding ceremony at Caesar's Palace on the night of December the 31st, 2001. The legal license filed in Los Angeles approximately 5 years later. The vow renewal at the W Hollywood on June the 4th, 2011. The 3-season run of the reality show on the E! Network from June of 2011 through February of 2014. The talk show pilot Ice and Coco, filmed in Stamford, Connecticut in July of 2015. The birth of Chanel Nicole Merrow on the 28th of November, 2015. The family home in Inglewood, New Jersey. Ice-T's career as a pioneer West Coast rapper, and his continuing role on the NBC Network's police procedural since the year 2000. Coco's career as a swimsuit and lingerie model, and the proprietor of her own brand, and the public quotes presented in this book have all been drawn from the public record across the period from 2001 through the spring of 2026. Specific verbatim quotes carried into the manuscript include Ice's pickup line, as recounted in the NBC Insider feature. Ice's casting frame for marriage, as drawn from the NBC Insider feature. Ice's January 2024 answer to the E! News interviewer about jungle sex. Coco's framing of the marriage as an old-fashioned type of love, drawn from her appearance on the Bunny XO Dumb Blonde podcast on November the 9th, 2025, and Coco's age 35 framing of the pregnancy decision drawn from her interview with the ABC News program. The interior scenes, the kitchen counter conversations, the small, specific domestic dialogue, the dance steps, the dramatic voices used at bedtime. The producer who pushes the introduction in the autumn of 2001 and is not named, and the labor and delivery nurse named Janice in Chapter 14 have been dramatized for the form. The names of Chanel, of Letitia Marrow, of Elijah Marrow, of Ice's son Little Ice, of the producer who introduced the couple, and of all dated public record anchors have been drawn from the public record. Where the public record is silent on the interior of a moment, the manuscript has been written to honor the spine of the publicly told story without inventing scandal, abuse, or dramatic event outside the public record. This book is not a documentary. This book is a love story. This book is, in plain English, the small, specific reading of a marriage that has, by the public record, been the longest publicly photographed hip-hop marriage on the catalog as of the spring of 2026. The marriage continues. The kitchen counter continues. The phone call at 10 continues. I have written this book because the marriage, in plain English, has earned a longer telling than the one the magazines have given it. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. This has been a Books by Barron audiobook in the Love Stories series, written, produced, and directed by Baron Darby, and narrated by Winslow. Thank you for listening.